Today's Gospel reading about the raising of Lazarus has got me thinking a lot about sorrow and about the question, where is Jesus in the midst of all this sorrow? Now, just a thing about the word sorrow. In English, we have two words that sound very similar, sorry and sorrow. But bizarrely, they are completely unrelated. They come from totally different roots. And yet they're like brothers from another mother. And we use them in similar ways. I'm sorry for your loss, we say. I share your sorrow, and so on. The word sorry comes from an Old English word that means pained or distressed. It's a very physical word, and the pain that it implies is a physical pain. But sorrow comes from a completely different Old English word that means to watch over, to worry, to concern oneself with, and is much more about the mind and what's going on up there. Now, I want us to hold on to both those words, sorry and sorrow, as we look at four passages that I think say something about Jesus and how he thinks and how he feels and what he offers in this time of national and international crisis. The first passage is Matthew chapter 9, verse 36. When he, that is Jesus, saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. The preceding verse says that when Jesus went around the cities and villages, teaching in the synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. So Jesus is going about doing missionary work, and then he looks out over the crowd who are harassed and helpless. The word used for harassed means that they're vexed, mangled. It actually means to be flayed alive. And the word for helpless means to be completely floored, to have the ground taken from underneath them. These are strong words. The people were buckling under the strain that they were under. And when Jesus sees the state of people, it says he has compassion for them. Compassion in those days was believed to come from your bowels, that your bowels were the centre of love and pity. So if you were really moved, if you had compassion, then they would use a word that meant that you were moved in your bowels. It's a gut-wrenching response. Nowadays, we talk about the heart as the centre of our love and pity, and so we would say that Jesus saw the crowds and was heartbroken. Either way, that's what the Bible means by compassion. And time again, the Gospels speak of Jesus' compassion, his compassion for the crowd because they're harassed and helpless. His compassion for the sick, his compassion for the woman who'd lost her only son, his compassion for the hungry, his compassion for the blind. There is a wonderful hymn by the former Bishop of Llandaff, Timothy Rees. God is love, let heaven adore him, which includes the verse, God is love, and he enfoldeth all the world in one embrace. With unfailing grasp he holdeth every child of every race. And when human hearts are breaking under sorrow's iron rod, then they find that self-same aching deep within the heart of God. That divine heartache is what we mean by the compassion of God. So let's go to the next verse, which comes from today's Gospel reading, John chapter 11, verse 35. It's the shortest verse in Scripture. Jesus wept, or Jesus began to weep. So to set the scene, a message is brought to Jesus that his friend Lazarus is dying. Lord, the one you love is sick. And Jesus hangs around for a bit and then decides to go back to Judea, even though they tried to kill him when he was last there. He comes to Mary and Martha's house, and the crowds are gathered, and it's a full-on kind of funeral service. And it says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. Jesus was deeply moved. The word means he snorted like a horse. It also said that he was troubled. The word means that he was stirred up. He was agitated. And then finally, Jesus wept. Actual tears, but silent. See, said the people, see how much he loved him. And then let's look at Luke 19, 41 to 44, at the end of Luke's account of Jesus entering Jerusalem. He tells us that Jesus looks out over the city, and as he does so, he weeps. He weeps audibly. It's an expression of uncontainable grief, more like loud wailing than anything else. The way verse 42 is actually written doesn't really make sense. Jesus isn't talking in complete sentences. He is incoherent with grief. If you had known, on this day, even you, the things that make for peace, but they are hidden from your eyes. Jesus has looked over the city and his heart is broken. He cries, he sobs, he wails with grief. He's beside himself. You see, this is love. Jesus' love for them, for us, literally broke his heart. He's heartbroken. Like the father of the prodigal son, the pain, the sorrow of unrequited love. You see how different this portrayal of Jesus is compared to the Jesus that we see in the movies. The writer Philip Yancey refers to a Prozac Jesus and says of these Hollywood portrayals, I realised Jesus' personality matched that of a Star Trek Vulcan. He remained calm, cool and collected as he strode like a robot among excitable human beings on spaceship Earth. But he says, that is not what I found portrayed in the Gospels. What he read in the Gospels was that other people affected Jesus deeply. Obstinacy frustrated him. Self-righteousness infuriated him. Simple faith thrilled him. Indeed, he seemed more emotional and spontaneous than the average person, not less. More passionate, not less. So let's go to my final passage, a passage that we will return to just before Easter. Matthew 26, 36 to 38. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, I am deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me. Jesus, it says, began to be grieved or sorrowful. Again, it's a really physical word that's used often to describe the pain of labour. This is intense agony, a painful rending of the gut, combined in this sense with a real sense of heaviness of heart. As Graham Kendrick wrote in his hymn, From Heaven You Came, there, in the garden of tears, my heavy load he chose to bear. His heart with sorrow was torn, yet not my will, but yours, he said. Just feel the weight of that line. His heart with sorrow was torn. So in just 4 passages, we've got into some really deep emotional and physical stuff. There is the gut-wrenching feeling, the heartbreak and compassion that Jesus felt when he saw the crowds who were harassed and helpless, troubled and confounded like sheep without a shepherd. Jesus' heart never sinks. His heart is always full of love. And sometimes that love even breaks his heart. Then there is the account in today's gospel reading of Lazarus, the one whom Jesus loved, where Jesus snorts with indignation and then weeps. And this isn't because of his pain alone, but also the pain he feels in the hearts of Mary and Martha. And the pain around this is Jesus saying, I really am sorry for your loss. And really meaning it. This is empathy in its richest sense. Jesus co-suffers with us. He feels our pain. Then there is the loud and strident crying as Jesus wept over the city, the pain of unrequited love, the pain that comes from rejection of his ways, his teaching, his very self. Would that you, even you this day, knew the ways that make for peace. But that feeling of sorrow would not be enough to bring people back to God. Jesus knew what it would take. There, in the garden of tears, my heavy load he chose to bear. His heart with sorrow was torn. Yet not my will, but yours, he said. Jesus would stop at nothing in order to reconcile us back to God. And ultimately it is his compassionate, heartbreaking, soul-shaking love that wins the day. So given the rich resources of the gospel, what can we say today to those who are suffering? Bradley Yersak, in his wonderful book, A More Christ-Like God, A More Beautiful Gospel, comes up with the following. Firstly, we can say that Jesus sees your suffering and he cares about your suffering. But also that Jesus knows your suffering intimately and experientially because he also suffered, but also because he dwells in you. Jesus suffered too, and he completely identifies with your pain. And he's here with you now. He co-suffers with you here, even in what might be your experience of his absence. Now, his co-suffering love does not mean that he is in the same helpless state of suffering or despair that we are in. His co-suffering means he wants to graft your pain onto the immense resources of his transforming love. And we can welcome his self-giving love to transform our pain and to bring redemption even in the dark night of absence and affliction. And we see that self-giving love most fully, most clearly on the cross. God of honest emotions, God of cathartic tears, it would be sadder if in these days we didn't need a good cry, a release from the body, a moment to name how it feels. We thank you that these tears are not tears of weakness, but of witness. They speak of a God who wept as we do and showed human love is divine. Amen.